Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the BNA Credibility Lunchbox webinar series. My name's Emily Sena. I'm a preclinical meta-research scientist at the University of Edinburgh, and I also sit on the BNA's Credibility Advisory Board. This is the latest in our series of continuing in vivo webinars. We had 3 back in March, and backed by popular demand, we have 3 more this month. This is part of the BNA's work to strengthen credibility in neuroscience research and is supported by the Gatsby Foundation. So this webinar series is they're very short, bite-sized, lunchtime 30-minute sessions. The format will be that our speaker will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and then the rest of the time will be available for questions. So I ask attendees to please enter your questions in the Q&A tab rather than the chat tab. You can use the chat tab for general points, but if you want questions directed to our speakers, then please put them in the Q&A. The webinar will also be recorded and will be available alongside other webinars in the series on the BNA's Credibility website. So I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today, Professor Ulrich Dirnagl. Uli is a professor of clinical neuroscience at Charité in Berlin, and also serves as director of the Department of Experimental Neurology. I was very excited in 2017 when he became the founding director of the Quest Center for Responsible Biomedical Research at the Berlin Institute of Health. And Quest is doing some really exciting and innovative stuff around overcoming roadblocks in translational medicine by increasing the value and the impact of primary research through maximizing quality, reproducibility, generalizability, and validity. I won't talk for too long because we don't have much time, so I'll pass over to you, Uli. Thank you very much.
Oh. Okay, so thank you very much, Em. Thank you for letting me talk about pre-registration. My slides are also online. I think it's also in the chat because I have not much time and a lot to say, and I have a lot of links in there, so maybe you can want to check them out later. First, a few disclosures. I've been involved in publishing not only on the author side, but also on the kind of publisher side. But my most important disclosure is that I'm a strong believer in the power of pre-registration. So watch out for bias here. So pre-registration, what are we talking about? I think a very simple definition would be that in pre-registration, researchers describe their hypotheses, methods, and analysis before a piece of research is conducted in a way that can be externally verified. And registration prioritizes theory, analysis, and methods over results. Now, why do we need to talk about pre-registration, and why do we have such a thing? Unfortunately, there's not enough time, and I sometimes have more time to talk about these things, but in fact, we have a lot of problems in biomedicine, and I'm sure you are aware of them. Some of this sails under the name replication crisis. We have, I think, a translational roadblock, specifically, I think also in neuroscience. Think stroke, think Alzheimer, think psychiatric diseases. That is problems in taking our preclinical findings to patients. We have an inflation bias, meaning we see lots of positive, significant results, but very little non-significant ones, and that is also related to the publication bias, which means all the publications report positive effects, but we don't see much of null results. So these are results that did not prove the hypothesis. Now, there are multiple reasons for all this, for this irreproducibility and for the translational attrition. And it's a long list, and it has to do with internal and external validity and statistical power. But a few of those reasons are interesting because they relate to pre-registration, because pre-registration is really something that can help here. And this has to do with the unwarranted and or undisclosed researchers' degrees of freedom in how we design, analyze, and report studies. There are lots of questionable and flawed statistical practices, you know, about p-hacking, applying many tests and then picking the one that was significant, for example, harking, hypothesizing after the results are known, outcome switching, all kinds of things. Then I already mentioned that we have the non-publication of the null results, which must be out there. And very often exploratory or discovery research is actually sold as being knowledge claiming or confirmatory, and there's much more. Now, it is almost spectacular that there's one thing that we can do which is at least effective. It's probably not a panacea, but it is effective as an antidote against many of those things, and that is pre-registration, because it limits the unwarranted, undisclosed researchers' freedom. It prevents us from outcome switching. It prevents harking. It prevents hacking. It provides, in addition, it provides scooping protection, it reduces publication bias, and in fact, it distinguishes between exploration and confirmation. So this is quite a lot in one measure. Where does this come from? And why do we know that it can actually be effective? This comes from clinical medicine, actually, where they have, for interventional trials, started this in 2000, when clinicaltrials.gov went online. That's actually basically state-run US trial registry for clinical trials. And from the moment on, trial registration was going on in this main website for this. And that's what you see in the graph on the left. Before that, and this is from heart disease, there were most of the studies reported positive outcomes. So something that's nice, and that's what we all want. Then when trial registration started on clinicaltrials.gov, there was a switch, and the positive results plummeted from 57 to a mere 8%. And that, I think, shows what it can do and what it must do. It is particularly effective for many reasons. One, there are these very well-established registries. There are national ones, there are international ones, but probably the most important fact here is that the major journals, actually, they require authors, when they submit their studies, to have pre-registered a study before they have included the first patient. And this is stipulated by the consort guidelines. And in fact, summary results, and that's WHO and European Union legislation, they have to be deposited within 12 months after study completion in one of those registries. Not all is perfect in terms of practice, but I think it's actually well developed, and it shows that pre-registration can do a lot. Now, what about preclinical? Now, we are also, I think, already very well advanced there, and it's not science fiction. It's here. And so, what are the options for you? So, for non-clinical, that is preclinical studies, and that includes in vitro and in vivo, there are all-purpose registries, and I think the most famous one, popular one, maybe even, is the Open Science Framework, which has a specific format for pre-registrations, which has kind of a loose structure, but it's very open to all kinds of different studies. And it's not a big deal to make a pre-registration there. You get a DOI and so forth. Another popular site for pre-registration in this space is aspredicted.org. Even less formal, but again, it gives you a DOI and everything. I should mention at this point that all these registries give you the opportunity to embargo what you have just registered, because, well, there are all kinds of concerns, and one of them is that you're being scooped before you're doing the study even, and intellectual property protection and so forth. So they all have options to embargo. Then there are dedicated animal study registries, and this is quite new. There's one in Germany, but it's open to every other country and anyone who wants to register there. It is basically run by the German state, so it has a very high security level. you're guaranteed that it will stay there forever, at least as long as the German state exists. And it's pretty formalized in terms of preclinical studies. But it's highly recommended. It comes with help functions and so forth. So it's a very robust tool. Another one that is really dedicated to animal studies is the Preclinical Trials EU site, and also recommended. But there are other ways of doing it. You could, for example, take, well, a printout even of your laboratory notebook, if you have an electronic one, of your study protocol, and then give it a timestamp on a timestamp server, on a blockchain. You put it into the blockchain. I mean, there's so many options, and use that. And that would be kind of a low-level entry into the world of pre-registration. And I would actually recommend this because it is definitely usable then later on when you have done the study and when you publish, you can go back to it, you can open it up and you can show that what you have pre-registered. And then of course there are registered reports, and that's kind of, all the others are non-reviewed, you just put in whatever you want, but then there are registered reports, and this is kind of the Rolls-Royce, if you wish, of pre-registration. There are many journals now that offer it. I last week talked to one of the chief editors of one of the major Nature journals, and they told me that they're now also establishing in their line of journals. The idea here is that actually the protocol that you have, where you have the design of the study, is what you submit to the journal. And that's called the stage 1, and it is being reviewed. It may be rejected with comments, and you can the beauty of this, now you get comments on your study when it's not too late, because now you can take the wisdom of the referees and include it in a modified design. Then you get if this is done properly, you get an in principle acceptance, which means that if you then have done the study, and if you have written up the report, and if you have submitted the journal and you haven't screwed up completely, you will be able to publish it, and they will basically just check formal things and whether you have stayed with your pre-registration. So that, I think, is very interesting and a way to go, certainly. Now, is this all simple and without criticism? Definitely not. I mean, many people, including myself, think that this will definitely improve the trust in science, the robustness of our results, and so forth. There is an argument that this is putting science in chains, and there are all kinds of arguments against it. And they can be, I think, summarized by a series of so-called inference fallacies. And so it was said that it creates an illusion of transparency, because there's still substantial room of selective reporting. Yeah, well, that is true. You could even register various versions of a study and then just pull out the one that fits you. But this is dishonest. This is not good science, and you have to do it on purpose. And I mean, people who do this don't belong in that system anyhow. So I think that's not a fair criticism. Then there supposedly is the illusion of robustness, which basically says just, I mean, we shouldn't believe that just if something's pre-registered, it's completely robust. But who says that? I mean, it's just taking care of a few of those problems, not all of them. And another criticism is to say that you could pre-register completely pointless science and then do it. And yeah, sure. So it's just one of the things we need to do. And I think it's very powerful. Then there's the point where people say that this would interfere with claiming intellectual property if you beforehand tell people what you're doing. I think it's just the opposite. First of all, you can and you will probably embargo it. And then, of course, later on, you have actually a foolproof and a safe system of demonstrating priority in something, which is great. A big issue is the question of pre-registering through discovery research, where you want to create hypothesis, not make a claim for something or prove a hypothesis. And that is certainly something that needs kind of more discussion and maybe also a bit more structure on the side of the registration sites. I made some suggestions for this, if you're interested in this discussion, I recommend this article, and of course the link is in the slides that I'm providing. So finally, and my conclusion is that pre-registration is certainly not a panacea, but I feel it's more like a Swiss Army knife for robust research. It can, but it does not necessarily or automatically limit bad research practices like unwarranted researchers' degrees of freedom, outcome switching, harking, p-hacking, and so forth. It's in principle still possible, and it provides scooping protection, it reduces publication bias, and so forth. One thing that I have forgotten to mention, which is of course important, if you have pre-registered something, there's always the possibility to amend it. If during the study you find out, well, I thought this is the way I need to do it, but then it turns out it didn't work. You create an amendment to it and you modify it. This is, of course, then recorded, and you need to justify what you're doing, but you're doing it out in the open, and it does not invalidate your pre-registration. And I think it was it Chris Chambers, or I don't know who said, Brian Nosek, pioneers in this. They said they have never done a pre-registration that did not have multiple amendments to the pre-registration. So this is also why it does not put you in chains. So I forgot this, so it was important to add this. Okay, so thanks, and I'm happy to answer questions or hear your comments on this. And as I said, the slides are online, and I will stop my presentation and come back. Okay.
Thanks, Uli. That was very much a whistle-stop tour. But I think you did hit the key points of the things that we need to think about regarding pre-registration, particularly for preclinical scientists. One thing I should say, first of all, to the audience, please put in your questions in the Q&A tab, but I'll get things started. So one of the things that struck me when you were speaking was about, how lots of journals now are offering registered reports. And I appreciate, these are the Rolls Royce, as you describe them, pre-registration. And there may be a shift once, the likes of some of the nature journals get involved in this space. But thinking, to like BMJ for Science, we've been offering these for 5 years now and have never received a preclinical registered report submission. So I guess my question to you is, what do you think are the barriers to the community? Because it's not like we don't have the tools or the infrastructure to facilitate this, but I guess that buy-in isn't happening yet.
I have a few ideas about it. I don't know. I think your diagnosis, I share your diagnosis. I think one of the reasons is that people don't know about it. In my environment, it's not really well known. Another reason is that there are misconceptions about it, and I think the primary misconception is this science and change things. Like, well, this may be, well, if you have a boring confirmatory study, then you already know what you're doing. But this is not the way it is. I mean, and that's, I think, something, and that's why that's a very important point I wanted to make, that this is certainly not the case. And this is because, first of all, the possibility of doing amendments, and also the possibility to not register the entire universe of what you're doing, but let's say the key experiment that you have in there.
Yeah.
Does the drug work or what? And you do some mechanistic stuff and around it, and then there's a lot of exploration. You don't pre-register that. And then it's not pre-registered, so everyone knows it's not pre-registered, and we know what to make out of it. But the core unit of it was pre-registered. And also something that I forgot to say, if you have a pre-registered study and you publish it, it is much more credible what you're presenting. I mean, it's such a big thing if you have pre-registered it. So it's a big bonus that then comes after 1 or 2 years of doing the study. And it's not much work, but you shouldn't forget it in the beginning, because you can't pre-register it once you've done the study. So,
indeed. And I guess related to this point, Kathy Abbott's asked the question, are there any curated examples of best practice registered reports according to field, like mouse preclinical studies always helps to see the way it should be done.
That's a very good point, actually, and I'm sorry to say that I don't have a curated list, but I will start creating one because I think that's a very good point.
I think it'd be really helpful.
What I can, well, I can't put it in the chat, but I'm not sure whether you have a possibility to put it into the material section here. Is I can put one of my pre-registration in there, or maybe Emily has one. It's a registered report, but it's the way it was done via F1000 research. And so it just shows how this is done. But thanks for the idea.
Yeah,
I think
it's a really
very good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm only aware of yours, and I know Hanno's done one as well, but beyond that, I'm not aware of many others. We have another question here. Are registered reports peer-reviewed using a similar process to primary articles? Is the process definitely as attentive, careful as peer review of articles with results? Yeah, so it's, I should stress again that pre-registrations, most of them that I mentioned on OSF and whatnot, they are not peer-reviewed at all. So this is what you write is what you get. But the registered reports, that is true. They are, and it's probably what you meant. So the registered reports are peer-reviewed, and they are peer-reviewed with the same scrutiny and in the same way with 2 or 3 referees and so forth. So there is basically no difference in how this is done. But it's front-loaded. So it starts before you start your experiment, and this means that the review, the second review, which happens at stage 2, is a much shorter procedure. And this could be even done in-house at the journal, and the referees may not even be involved in it. But otherwise, it's just the same thing. I would maybe even argue that it's possibly a bit more rigorous, given the focus on experimental design. And it's also more rewarding, I think, for a referee to look at something that is in the make, because now, I mean, your expertise is really has some meaning. Has value. If you criticize a study and say, well, you shouldn't have done this because it's just, it's so frustrating, because then they have to start over and they probably won't do it anyhow. But here you can make a real contribution. So I think even for the referee, this is much more, makes much more sense to spend time on something where you have a true impact. I agree. I always like the example that I can't remember who said it, and it was in the context of people going to statisticians at the end of a study asking how to analyze something, saying, well, the best we can do is do a post-mortem. And I guess that's the kind of model that we have around peer review, isn't it? These are post-mortems of what you could have done better, whereas registered reports really allow some impact and influence on making things better. We have another question. How important is it for funders to engage with preclinical registration? Should pre-registration of studies link to funding applications? Yeah, that's also a very good one. And I wish this point would be heard by more funders. There are actually funders and specific funding lines where this is already in place. I know some US funders, specialty funders, I think one in the Parkinson's field, it may even be Michael J. Fox, is requiring it, unless I mean, if you get funded by them, you have to pre-register. There is a German call, and Emily knows about it because I think she was also involved as a referee in its first round on confirmatory studies. And their pre-register, there's now a second round which is imminent, and their pre-register. If you accept the funding, you need to pre-register the study. So to me, like so many things where funders have true power to get something on the street, this is another very good example. And if funders would mandate this would make it a success model from one day to the next. We had some really interesting conversations actually around that call that you're talking about in Germany, about linking registration also with publication, because we're all complaining that we don't have enough time and there's too much to do, and we often are essentially writing the same thing over and over again for different audiences, and linking your proposal and that pre-registration with the publication that will come out at the end, it addresses also the issues that you mentioned, including things like publication bias and rigor. But I think it's just a much more efficient way of doing things. And there is a funder as well, I think, in the States around, it's a childhood, one of the children's diseases that does this, I think in collaboration with PLOS potentially, where it's essentially registered reports grant submission system. So yes, but I agree, getting funders truly engaged, I think, would really move this forward.
I just put this one registered report of a mouse study in the chat.
Oh, in the chat, yes, I see that.
It's not a list. I'm sorry.
One example, but no, I think a list would help, particularly in the preclinical space. One thing that I was interested in that you also mentioned in your talk was around exploratory research. Because I have to admit, in the context that I've spoken about pre-registration and registered reports, has been very much in that kind of confirmatory space. And I wondered if you wanted to just elaborate on that a little bit to give us a bit more insight.
Sure. So if you want the full version, it's in this paper. The idea of the paper is basically a modification of the way these pre-registrations are done. It's more like, if you wish, another form of an open lab protocol, in a sense. Some people do this. They are open. There's even a movement where they open up their laboratory notebooks, kind of make them a blog, if you wish. They're ones. But this could be modified in a sense that you start with a very loose description of what you're doing, and the more you're zooming in on the things that you're doing, you can sort of from step to step, because we normally, I mean, we triangulate, we go into one direction and we go into the next. So, and I compared it in this paper to how the kind of the explorers of the 16th century, they sent maps home where they are just now, also for triangulation, if you wish. So I think there are ways of doing it, but it's for true exploration even. But it's not straightforward, and there is no blueprint where you could say, well, this is how we should do it. And there may be also some good arguments to say, well, maybe we don't need it. I think it would help, but for now, I think what I would certainly advocate is to say that in very often we do these like kind of mixed things, like we explore and then some of this confirms and then we move on. And so we could pick the ones that are actually confirming our hypotheses and are built into the stream of our research, and pick them and pre-register them. And then you could write a paper that actually has 2 or 3 pre-registrations in it for those key claims that you're making. So I think we need to play a little bit with it. And there are no fixed rules to it. This is why I also said you could take a study protocol that you have in your laboratory notebook and make a photocopy and put it into the blockchain.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Well,
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. That's fascinating. Okay, we're coming up to 1:30 now. So I just want to first of all say a big thank you to you, Uli. It's always great to get the opportunity to chat to you. I was saying earlier, we've not seen each other for a long time. So it's been great to catch up and hear about what's been going on in this space from your perspective. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. It's great that people are interested in these credibility webinars and want to hear about things they can do to improve the rigor of their research. I encourage you, if you didn't attend the previous webinars, they're available on the credibility website. And I suspect a link may drop in the chat as well. So to have a look, because they were interesting. I was saying earlier, they were a bit broader, rather than more specific, like this one. And if you are interested in the next in the series, that will be next Wednesday the 20th of July, at 1:30 UK time, where my colleague Caitlin Hare will talk about handling data in your in vivo studies. So really thinking about making sure that your data are robust and that you'll be able to track data focusing on things that I think maybe aren't necessarily the norm in the way that we've traditionally handled data in vivo studies. So I encourage you to join us next week. I also want to finally thank the ongoing support from the Gatsby Foundation, who support the BNA's credibility campaign and enable us to have these webinars. So with that, I'll let you get on with the rest of your afternoon. Thanks again, Uli, for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.